You're listening to Health Professional Radio. My name is Wayne Bucklar. Joining me today in conversation, my guest is Judy Swan. Judy's Principal Solicitor, Notary Public and Mediator from Swan Lawyers in Sydney. Now, Judy, we're talking today about the way courts are dealing with family matters, and I know you've got experience in a number of jurisdictions, so I'm keen to hear what you think the issues are here and how they're being dealt with in other jurisdictions.
Well, Wayne, it's actually quite interesting because the courts used to have a traditional idea of how to deal with separation and marriage and divorce, but this has changed as the way the nuclear family has changed. So, for example, in the past, when children were part of a marriage breakup, the mother would traditionally have the children and the father would have the children every second weekend, and that was accepted. However, nowadays it seems that there was a lot of action on the fathers' rights groups who wanted to have their children more often than they were, and I'm not sure whether this was influenced as a consequence of child support issues or whether it was influenced because fathers genuinely wanted to have more time with their children, and it's causing an enormous amount of problems within court systems because people don't like sharing the children. And children don't like being shoved and shunted from one house to another. Some children can cope with it, but generally when there's acrimony, they can't. So it is a real problem today where the courts or the legislators thought, well, we're doing the right thing by changing the law to make it more equal. It's actually caused far more problems psychologically for the children in the sense that children are now really homeless. They don't have a secure base, and I'm not sure that that's a good thing for children. And I think that as much as it seems fairer, it has really not solved the fundamental issue that exists, and that is to take care of the children. So that's just the one level of family law, which is an issue. Family law is divided into 4 different components. The first component is the divorce, and that in Australia is after a year you can file for a divorce, and it's a simple form filling procedure which you can do online, and you get divorced provided there's proper parenting arrangements in place. The registrar will generally grant you your divorce. The problem with that is that in Australia we also have a lot of different cultural groups. So we'll have the Muslims and we'll have the Jews and other people who get divorced in their own religious ceremonies. So in the Jewish faith, it's the get, and in the Muslim faith, I'm not really sure what they call it, but they like to get divorced quickly after the marriage ends, and then they want to get remarried because they don't believe in sex before marriage, or they don't believe in sex outside of a marriage. And that then causes a problem where some religious leaders are not aware, but they're then marrying someone for a second time under the Islamic faith, but that really is participating in a bigamous transaction because the imam is qualified to marry someone in Australian law. So that's a problem. Then you've got the issue of the children and what happens to the children, and that's something that I have a massive concern about and a big focus on because parents think that by sharing their children, they think that it's equal, and that causes a problem too because the children then are moved from one house to another house, and then it's destabilizing for the children. Then ultimately you've got the property settlement, which depending on how many nights a week a child stays with you or stays with the other parent can influence the property settlement. So that's why people are now fighting about children. They think they're fighting about the property, but they're actually they think that they pretend they're fighting about the children, but effectively there's an underlying issue, and it's about how much more money can I get out of this marriage if I have the children on a longer-term basis. And then finally, you've got the issue of child support, which again is very much determined on the number of nights that a child lives with you. So the mother could be looking after the child all day long if she's not a working party, which sometimes happens. But then dad wants the children 7 days a week because he then doesn't have to support mum or pay as much child support to mum, or vice versa. So it is actually what I would say a mess, a complete mess at the moment because there are no guidelines, and I'm not sure that we are approaching it properly. I'm not sure that the court is the right place to be determining some of these issues. I'm working with a French and Montreal group, and they're psychologists. There's one lawyer involved, there's psychologists involved, and we're trying to work out a system that could actually be proposed for Australia, New Zealand, wherever, even South Africa. Most of these jurisdictions are tagging on now and actually having the same. So New Zealand and Australia have a fairly similar system. South Africa used to have a system which was used to have a system where these things weren't taken into account, and it has what you call a Rule 43 application, where a woman who can claim spousal maintenance from her husband, and that's far more prevalent than here. So in Australia, the spousal maintenance is not as high on the agenda as it is there. So there's different sorts of things going on in different jurisdictions, and what we're trying to do is to create a worldwide move to try and ensure that there is a uniform approach to family law matters, an approach where you take the legal system outside of the children's issues, put it in front of psychologists, social workers, almost like on a tribunal basis, and perhaps the lawyer there just so that the lawyer can make sure that the law is being followed, and assessing where would the children be best suited to be living. So that's really what we're working on in the background. And I think there's a lot of people pushing for that, but I'm not sure how fast it will gain momentum.
Yeah, I was interested to ask how you saw it progressing here, whether you saw the changes being welcomed here or whether you thought it might be a very slow and difficult process.
Well, unless we do something quickly, we are going to find a disintegration in our society, because so many people who go through lengthy, protracted, acrimonious divorces or separations, so it doesn't have to be divorce, because remember, people in de facto relationships really do have the same rights as a married couple. Mm-hmm. The acrimony continues. The money that's spent is too terrible for words. Family lawyers, are notorious for almost milking and not necessarily trying to resolve issues. It becomes a staunch between the two. The lawyers. I always say to my clients if they come to see me, now, who is your wife, or who is your husband, or who is your partner seeing? And depending on the name of the law firm, I'll say, oh, well, you're in for big trouble here. Because, go and settle it as quickly as you can, because it can cost up to... I remember getting a case at the tail end of the matter. The parties were both highly intelligent people, and both parties, by the time I got the matter, had spent $350,000 on legal fees just to get it to the court.
Yes.
And it was just ridiculous. And these people were exhausted. Dad had dropped off working so many days a week so he could make sure that Mum didn't get enough, sufficient money, yes. And it was just, and these poor children were just feeling the pain. They were feeling the parents' anxiety. It's just the most awful situation. So I think if we had an intake system, which I think happens in France now, where when parties get divorced, and I know that in Australia they've implemented and they're getting strict now about it, is where you have to get a Section 60 certificate, Section 60I certificate, and it means that you have to go to a mediator before. The problem that we've now got is that all this domestic violence legislation, which has been introduced, rightly or wrongly, and we can go on about that on a different program and a different time, but the domestic violence legislation, because of Rose Batty's experience and other people similar to Rose Batty, it has resulted that the mediation is then considered not to be appropriate. So it then becomes a problem that people then don't go to mediation and then end up in the court system. And then you've got that, controlling, borderline, narcissistic personality trying to stop or block or gatekeep one parent from another parent, or you've got the other one who was the victim making allegations far worse than needs to be made to also stop, gatekeep, and protect. So it's an absolute schmozzle, and unfortunately these poor children are shoved from pillar to post, and courts are now imposing what they call bars on parents depending on how badly they foresee their behaviours. So I look at these very intelligent people who've broken down, who have nothing left, who end up with no money, no assets, and no children because all they were trying to do was protect their children. And the ridiculous situation is that you can be in an abusive relationship where someone's controlling, manipulative, narcissistic, borderline, believes his or her story. And after the separation, instead of them looking at themselves and saying, oh, well, that I caused this marriage breakdown, they will immediately deflect it and put it on the other person who actually stayed in that relationship because they were fearful of leaving the relationship. And you have children then witnessing domestic violence or psychological abuse, and then you'll have the situation where you've got the police who, unless they see blood, are not necessarily willing to take matters further, or they're very good most of the time, but often they're cautious because they're scared that one party's manipulating the system. Then you've got a further problem where you've got the police system is state and the family court is federal in Australia.
Yes.
So then you've got the police saying, well, this is not our problem, this is a family court matter. And then you've got the family court saying, well, the police haven't investigated, so why should we worry about it? I mean, I've got a classic case at the moment where I've got a woman, and I won't say which state because it might even identify this poor woman, but, she was a social worker working as a mandatory reporter, and her children displayed sexualized behavior.
Yes.
She was a bit concerned about it. She reported it to whoever she did. I don't want to say which organization. They then marched in, seized the husband's computers, did whatever they did, and she was shocked because she had no idea it was him. Then she went to the family court because she was, egged on. They then didn't continue the investigation. Why not? I don't know. And in the end, she was blamed and the children were removed away from her. But this woman was a lecturer. She was a highly intelligent. She's now destroyed. And I can't even begin to tell you where we're going with this. And she's not the first one, and she's not the second one, and she's not the third one. And then you get the whole crowd of people that then thinks that the whole family system, court system is rorted because you'll get one judge. I mean, this woman sent me a disc of what she videoed of her children. My computer went on, alarm, don't look at this, it's pornography. And a judge in the family court said it's normalized sexual behavior. And because a state government department had not actually investigated it and had told the judge it had, or someone had told the judge it had. So she's a one-off example that I can mention, but she's not a one-off example.
Of a system that does sound like it's in desperate need of some alternatives.
Exactly, and that's why I believe that someone like Pauline Hanson, who has nothing to offer the world, is offering the world something because she's saying the family court needs to be reformed. And people are blaming the judges, but the judges are sitting there and they can only make decisions on the evidence that is brought to their attention. And often that evidence has been filtered or already prejudged by independent children's lawyers who are not necessarily properly qualified to know what is going on. So, you can get very intelligent people who can be conned by sociopaths, psychopaths, and not actually know what is going on. Or you have experts who have a very fixed view on something, and they will not shift their view because, again, they see parties for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and they make an assessment based on 20 minutes or 30 minutes. And they make assessments on matters which are far more complex. So my proposal, or what I'm purporting to propose, and I've been speaking to Professor Patrick Parkinson, who has always been part of the legislative changes, and he acknowledges that while there was a lot of money that was put in, that there were 2002, there was a commission inquiry into the family court system, and a lot of the proposed changes weren't implemented, and they should have been implemented. And a lot of funding went into these family relationship centres. And that would work where there is no domestic violence. But under Section 60I, which is people need to read this up, you don't have to go to mediation prior to filing a children's matter if you claim domestic violence. So that means that they're in the court system, and once they're in the court system, it is a disaster because you don't have the proper attention that you need to have. And many moons ago, and we're talking about pre-96 reforms that were introduced by John Howard, the family courts were actually loaded with psychologists and, two-way mirrors where there'd be three people sitting at the back and two people sitting for complicated cases. And they had a very clear idea of what they were doing, and they were able to give proper assessments of difficult cases when people came in. And there were very good counselling setups going on in the family court. Now, these resources have been removed and taken to the family centres. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the family centres. Some family centres, like the one in Wagga Wagga, are just unbelievable. Relationships Australia, they bend over backwards to accommodate families to make sure that there's no better word than non-custodial parent. It's now called non-live-with parent. But anyway, the non-live-with parent actually gets sufficient time with the child in circumstances which are difficult. So it's more about the intake system at the family court. So my proposal is, if it's a children's matter, you walk through the door, you can't come in with a lawyer, you get to see a social worker or a psychologist or someone who's properly trained up. That person then makes recommendations, makes a report if there is mandatory reporting required to the Australian Federal Police, that then needs to have a special victims unit, properly trained, forensically trained into whether there is true child sexual abuse or whether it's some sort of allegation by mum or dad to try and protect his or her interests in getting the children. The children are being used as pawns now because of this child support legislation, which is how much time spent, and because of the fact that in Australian family law and in other parts of the world as well, the amount of property you get really is quite largely dependent on how much time the children spend with you.
Judy, it does sound like a very, very complicated process, and I thank you for trying to clarify it for us today. We might have to come back and have a chat about some of these other matters as we go along, because it's a lot to take in one conversation.
Yes, and unfortunately, the problem that I'm seeing now is that people who were good earning contributors to Australian society are now on Centrelink benefits. So unless the government does throw a lot of money behind this, we're going to find that the welfare system is going to increase simply because people have been so psychologically scarred by their experience of divorce and separation.
Judy, thank you for your time today. Now, I'm sure that there'll be a lot of people that we've triggered stuff for and who may be interested in having a further chat. Your website is swanlawyers.com.au, and that's the best place for people to get in touch with you.
Wayne, if there's a website query, I will respond to it. My mobile phone number is probably the best place to get hold of me, which is 0414-341-317, or even email judy.swan@swanlawyers.com.au. I try to reach everybody because I believe that everybody needs access to justice, and I believe that everybody needs to be told or be given at least the opportunity to be sent to Relationships Australia or to be sent to a private mediator who's not that expensive. There are people like that out there, and that certainly will cut their costs of their legal bills, and it might help save the community in a big way.
Thank you for your time today, Judy. It's been a pleasure chatting with you again.
Thank you, Wade.
If you've just missed my conversation with Judy Swan, we have on our website both a transcript and an audio archive. You can also hear the audio archive on iTunes or on SoundCloud. This is Wayne Bucklar. You're listening to Health Professional Radio.